It's January 1977. A CII archivist is working through a warehouse in Rockville, Maryland. Routine records work. Pulling misfiled cabinet drawers. He pulls open one misfiled drawer and finds documents that were supposed to not exist. The shredders had run for days in 1973. Somebody ordered everything destroyed. But one box survived. That box held 20,000 pages. LSD dosed into drinks without consent. Electroshock applied without consent. Sensory deprivation for weeks at a stretch. A program called MKUltra. The man who ordered it all destroyed, CIA Director Richard Helms, was already gone by the time the box was found. The question the archivist couldn't answer, and no one has answered since, is what else didn't survive. MKUltra is not a theory. It ran from 1953 to at least 1963, across more than 150 sub-projects, at 80 institutions, including 44 universities, and it was funded through front organizations specifically designed to hide it from Congress.
And we know all of that from the surviving documents, which, let's be clear, are financial records. They prove money moved. They don't prove what happened to the people that money was spent on.
So we have the receipts, but not the crime scene photos. That's actually the worst possible combination.
Helms testified before the church committee after the records were destroyed, was never charged with obstruction, and died in 2002. His memoir, a full book about his career, barely mentioned MKUltra. He called what he would ordered shredded the dark arts.
The dark arts. He chose that phrase deliberately. That's not a man who thought he was destroying embarrassing paperwork. That's a man who knew exactly what he was protecting.
Or he was just a fan of a very specific genre of fiction. I am going with the first one, though.
Here is the actual cold case. The 20,000 pages that survived are budget documents, misfiled with the CIA Inspector General's office completely by accident. They tell us money went out. The operational files, who was experimented on, what the protocols were, what the results showed, are gone.
So what we are investigating isn't did MKUltra happen. We know it happened. The question is whether there is a second archive somewhere, or whether the destruction in 1973 was genuinely total.
Right. Because we definitely tortured people, we just don't know the full extent is somehow not the end of the conversation. It's actually the beginning of it.
MKUltra got its formal green light on April 13, 1953. CIA Director Allen Dulles signed off on it. Dulles was Princeton class of 1914, and he was genuinely convinced the Soviets had already solved behavioral control. He would watched the Korean War POW, confessions and the Stalinist show trials and concluded, they have something we don't.
Hold on. Those show trial confessions specifically. Was there any actual evidence that Soviet conditioning worked, or was Dulles' pattern, matching on things that looked like brainwashing?
Mostly the latter. The confessions looked impossible to explain without some chemical or psychological intervention, so the CIA assumed a gap. The program was built on a fear of a Soviet capability that probably didn't exist.
So the entire thing started because some guys watched a very convincing press conference and panicked. That's very relatable, actually.
It's also exactly how arms races start. You don't need a real threat. You just need a plausible one.
The man Dulles handed it to was Sidney Gottlieb, a CIA chemist who, by every biographical account, was one of the stranger figures in Cold War history. He had a clubfoot and a stutter. He kept a working goat farm in rural Virginia. He made his own yogurt. He was also simultaneously running one of the most expansive covert human experimentation programs the US government has ever operated.
So he's churning butter in the morning and ordering LSD experiments in the afternoon. That is a resume I was not prepared for.
Journalist Stephen Kinzer actually wrote a whole book on Gottlieb titled Poisoner in Chief. The picture he paints is of someone who genuinely believed he was protecting the country, which somehow makes it worse.
Gottlieb organized the program into around 150 sub-projects. Some were standard behavioral psychology, relatively innocuous. But others involved dosing subjects with LSD without telling them, experimenting with hypnosis and electroshock therapy, testing psychotropic compounds on prisoners who had no idea what was in their food. And then there was Ewan Cameron.
Cameron is the Canadian piece, right? Walk me through what he was actually doing.
Cameron was a psychiatrist at McGill University's Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. He called his work psychic driving, and what he meant was use prolonged drug-induced sleep, electroshock at many times the normal clinical voltage, and looped audio messages to essentially wipe a patient's existing personality and rebuild it. He thought he could reprogram people.
That's not psychiatry. That's a factory reset on a human being.
George White ran the field operation known as Operation Midnight Climax, CIA safe houses in San Francisco and New York. Active from 1954 to 1966, he hired women to bring men back, dosed them with LSD without consent, and monitored the results from behind one-way mirrors. The documentation on White's side is specific. He wrote in his own diary that he toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun.
White actually wrote that down, in a diary, about a covert CIA surveillance program.
The villain left a Yelp review, 5 stars. Great LSD, would surveil again.
And this ran for 12 years. That's not a rogue experiment, that's an institution.
Which is exactly what the CIA's own Inspector General flagged in 1963. The IG reviewed MKUltra and put it in writing. Some experiments, quote, could result in severe damage to the subject, and the rights and interests of the subject will be completely disregarded. That report existed. The program continued for at least another decade under related programs anyway.
So there is a paper trail showing the CIA knew it was causing severe harm in 1963 and kept going. That's the document that should end the debate about whether anyone in charge understood what was happening.
Their own inspector said, this will severely damage people, and the response was essentially noted. Filing that away, moving on. That's not a cover-up at that point, that's a policy.
And because those words come from the CIA's own internal review, no one can call it an exaggeration. They described it in the most bureaucratic, careful language possible, and it still reads as damning as anything the critics ever wrote. By 1962, the CIA and the Army had already started moving past LSD. They'd found something they thought was more promising. A compound called BZ. A super hallucinogen that could incapacitate someone for up to 80 hours.
So they explicitly gave up on LSD as, what was the phrase, the secret that was going to unlock the universe, and immediately pivoted to something stronger. That's not abandonment of the program. That's an upgrade.
They failed upward into a worse drug. That's a career trajectory I recognize.
The internal logic was consistent the whole time. If this compound doesn't give us reliable behavioral control, find one that does. The goal never changed. Only the chemistry did.
Which means the 1963 IG report we just talked about didn't slow anything down. They were already shopping for the next tool while the Inspector General was writing up how damaging the current one was.
January 4, 1973. Helms issues the destruction order 2 months before he officially leaves as CIA director. His stated reason, given later under oath, was that he didn't want the records used to embarrass people who had participated in good faith.
Good faith. He used that phrase about people who were knowingly dosing civilians without consent. Walk me through the timing here. What did he know was coming?
He knew congressional scrutiny was intensifying post-Watergate, and he was about to move to Tehran as ambassador to Iran. He needed distance from anything that could drag him back before a committee. The order came before he would even cleared his desk.
So he shredded the evidence and then left the country. That's not covering your tracks. That's the whole playbook in 2 sentences.
And he was never charged with obstruction, even after testifying before the Church Committee about ordering the destruction of federal records. That's the part that should make everyone's jaw drop and somehow doesn't get mentioned enough.
Gottlieb testified that he and Helms made the call jointly. It wasn't a unilateral order. It was a decision between the two of them. And Gottlieb's own Church Committee deposition, kept classified for 50 years, was only released by the National Security Archive in October 2025.
50 years. What came out of that deposition?
Church Committee staff grilled him on 3 specific areas: assassination plots, LSD dosing programs, and domestic spying. And Gottlieb's answer to almost everything was some version of "I don't recall," repeatedly, across all 3 subject areas.
He ran one of the most documented secret programs in CIA history and couldn't remember any of it. That man had a very selective filing system.
I don't recall under oath is a specific legal maneuver. It's not the same as denial. He didn't say it didn't happen. He just said he couldn't confirm it.
Exactly. And the committee couldn't contradict him because the documents that would have refreshed his memory had been shredded 2 years earlier on his own recommendation.
That's actually a perfect crime from a purely technical standpoint. Destroy the evidence, then forget everything. Legally bulletproof.
Morgan's right, though, and that's the thing that connects this whole thread. The destruction of the records wasn't just covering up what happened. It guaranteed no one could ever be held accountable for what happened. Those are two different crimes.
Which brings us to how the surviving 20,000 pages actually surfaced. CIA historian John Kirkpatrick found them in 1977, misfiled in the agency's retired records center in Rockville, the same facility we opened on. They'd been sitting there for 4 years after the destruction order, completely unnoticed. Because they'd been routed to the wrong office.
And when Kirkpatrick opened them, what specifically was in there?
Payments, budget line items, disbursements to researchers, to institutions, to front organizations. The financial skeleton of the whole operation. What was not in there: experimental protocols, subject files, results, adverse events. The money trail survived. The human trail didn't.
So we know the CIA paid for something terrible. We just can't prove exactly what the terrible thing was. That's somehow the state of affairs in the freaking National Archives.
On August 3, 1977, after Kirkpatrick's discovery forced the issue, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence held its formal MKUltra hearing. Senator Daniel Inouye chaired it. CIA Director Stansfield Turner sat in front of the committee and admitted the agency had experimented on unwitting subjects. He called it abhorrent, said it violated, in his words, the rights and dignity of the individual.
Turner wasn't the director when any of this happened. He was brought in by Carter specifically to clean house. So this is the CIA's new director sitting across from the Senate and saying, yes, the previous people did something abhorrent.
That's actually a pretty extraordinary thing to sit through. Someone taking the stand for an institution they run and going, yeah, we did that. It was bad. Sorry.
Except sorry isn't on the record. Accountability isn't on the record. Turner acknowledged it happened, and then the hearing produced reforms that were later quietly rolled back. That's the pattern I keep coming back to.
And if you think that's where the story gets uncomfortable, hold on, because what we are about to get into is the part the financial records can't explain at all. The specific people, the specific harms, and the gap between what we can prove and what we know must have happened. Frank Olson was an Army biochemist, not a prisoner, not a subject recruited from a mental ward. He was one of the researchers. In November 1953, he attended a CIA retreat at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland, and was dosed with LSD without being told. 9 days later, he fell from the 10th floor of the Hotel Statler in New York. Ruled a suicide.
Fell is doing a lot of work in that sentence. What changed in 1994?
His family had the body exhumed. Forensic pathologist James Starrs examined it and found evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull. Injuries inconsistent with a fall, consistent with a blow before the fall. The official ruling has never been changed.
He was dosed by his own colleagues, fell from a building, and the case file says suicide. That's not a loose end, that's a whole frayed sweater.
And because the operational records are gone, we can't reconstruct what Olson knew, what he would seen, or whether anyone had a reason to silence him beyond the obvious one. The destruction of files doesn't just erase experiments, it erases motive evidence.
Then there is the Canadian dimension, which is its own category of documented horror. Ewan Cameron ran his experiments at McGill University's Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, funded by the CIA through a front organization called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology.
Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. That sounds like the name you give a cover organization when you've run out of ideas but still need to write checks.
Walk me through what Cameron was actually doing with that funding, beyond what we covered on the psychic driving overview.
He kept patients in drug-induced sleep for stretches of up to 86 days straight, while they were under electroshock at 30 to 40 times the normal clinical voltage. Then looped audio recordings, the same messages, hundreds of times, to try to overwrite whatever personality remained. The Canadian government eventually settled with 9 surviving victims in 1992, paying each $100,000.
9 survivors settled with, which means the government had decided it was cheaper and cleaner to pay than to litigate. That's its own kind of confirmation.
$100,000 for someone erasing your personality with electricity for 3 months. I don't even know what the right number is, but it's not that.
Now, the Steelman for a hidden archive. This is where the math gets uncomfortable. 150 subprojects, running for a decade across 80 institutions. Standard research generates subject files, experimental protocols, adverse event logs, results reports. If even half those projects kept normal documentation, the operational record would run into the hundreds of thousands of pages. What we have is 20,000 pages of budgets. The complete absence of any experimental file in any FOIA release, in any declassification, means one of two things.
Either it was destroyed completely, or it's still classified somewhere. Those are genuinely the only two options.
Right, and we destroyed all of it perfectly requires you to believe a government agency executed a document destruction with 0 mistakes, except for the one box they didn't get, which they already proved they could miss.
That's actually a good point. The survival of the financial records proves the destruction wasn't total. So arguing for complete destruction requires explaining why the operational files were eliminated perfectly, when the administrative files weren't.
The counterargument is real and worth taking seriously. The Church Committee had access to CIA personnel and existing records between 1975 and 1976. 14 months of investigation. They concluded what they concluded, and they did not flag a hidden operational archive or allege concealment beyond the 1973 order. The 1977 Senate Intelligence Committee report acknowledged the records were incomplete, but it stopped short of claiming anything was being actively buried.
That matters. The Church Committee was not friendly to the CIA. This was the committee that exposed COINTELPRO and the assassination plots. If there had been an obvious trail pointing to a second archive, they had every incentive to follow it.
So either the committee missed something, or there is genuinely nothing left to find. And I don't love either of those options.
No. But the absence of a finding isn't the same as proof of absence. It's more like they couldn't find a trail because the trail had been shredded. Their conclusion and the destruction order don't contradict each other. They're the same story from two angles.
Then in December 2024, the National Security Archive and ProQuest published a new collection, over 1,200 MKUltra-related documents assembled from CIA FOIA releases, Senate records, and court filings.
And what did 1,200 new documents actually add?
Institutional context. They confirmed the breadth of the program, which institutions were involved, how the funding moved, which front organization that were used. What they did not contain was a single operational file, no subject records, no experimental results, no adverse event reports. 70 years on, every new release fills in the administrative frame. The picture inside the frame is still blank.
So we keep getting more evidence that something happened, and 0 evidence of what actually happened to the people it happened to. That is a very specific kind of not knowing that feels deliberate, even if it isn't.
Tell you what, Morgan thinks the 1973 destruction was genuinely total, and the Church Committee would have found something if there was something to find. I think the math on missing operational records is too clean to be coincidence. Viewers, we genuinely don't agree on this one. Tell us in the comments who you think is right.
There is one more thread in the investigation, and I want to flag up front that this one is unverified. On May 13, 2026, a CIA whistleblower named James Erdman III testified before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee about CIA activities.
What specifically did Erdman claim about MKUltra, and who has independently corroborated it?
That's exactly the problem. As of now, the specific MKUltra-related claims from that testimony haven't been confirmed by any independent source. It's in the public record that he testified, but the substance remains unverified.
So we have a whistleblower, a Senate committee, and a mystery. That's either the beginning of a major revelation or the beginning of a very bad Wikipedia citation.
Worth noting, but we call it what it is: unverified. If documentation surfaces, the story changes. Right now, it doesn't move the needle.
All right, verdict time. Here is what the evidence actually locks in. MKUltra ran from 1953 to at least 1963. 150 sub-projects, 80 institutions, 44 universities. That's not disputed by anyone. The surviving financial records, the 1963 Inspector General Report, Turner's 1977 Senate admission, the Cameron settlements, they all corroborate each other independently.
4 separate corroborating sources for the same basic facts. That's as confirmed as it gets without a complete operational record.
So the floor of confirmed horror is already extremely high. We haven't even gotten to the speculative stuff yet, and I am already exhausted.
Second confirmed fact, Helms ordered the destruction in January 1973. Gottlieb confirmed his own role under oath, and the 20,000 pages are physically real, sitting in the National Archives right now. Not a rumor, not a theory.
And the destruction order itself being confirmed is important, because it means the absence of operational records isn't a mystery. It has a documented cause. Someone made a decision. We know who.
Both of them, actually, they made it together, which somehow makes it feel even more considered than if one person had just panicked.
Third confirmed category, and this is the one with actual human faces attached. Unwitting subjects were dosed with LESD. Operation Midnight Climax is documented. Cameron's personality erasure experiments led to legal settlements, and Frank Olson dosed without consent. Dead 9 days later, blunt force trauma found on exhumation in 1994. His case is officially unresolved to this day.
Officially unresolved is the precise term. The ruling hasn't changed. The evidence stars found hasn't been formally incorporated into any government finding. It just exists alongside the official verdict, unreconciled.
That's not a cold case. That's a case where someone put the file in a drawer and hoped everybody would move on.
Now, what's speculated, the hidden operational archive theory that hundreds of thousands of experimental result pages survived somewhere and are still classified. It's a reasonable inference from the math. But reasonable inference is not evidence. No FO. IA. Release no declassification. No source in 70 years has produced a single operational file.
And the Church Committee, which was actively hostile to the CIA and had subpoena power, spent 14 months looking and didn't surface one. That's not nothing.
Right. If it exists, it's hidden so well that the most aggressive congressional investigation of U.S. intelligence and history couldn't find it, which is either proof of extraordinary concealment or proof that there is nothing left to find.
Both explanations are compatible with everything we know. That's what makes this an actual cold case rather than a solved one. The evidence genuinely doesn't resolve it.
Second speculation category, and this one matters because it's where the internet version of the story completely departs from the record. The CIA's own internal assessments by 1963 concluded the program had not produced reliable behavioral control. They tried, they failed, and they knew they failed.
So the celebrity mind control claims, beyond Britney Spears, politicians as CIA assets, those don't just lack supporting evidence. They contradict the CIA's own conclusion about what the program achieved.
The CIA tried to build a mind control weapon for a decade and wrote down, "This doesn't work." And the conspiracy theory is that they then used it to manage pop stars. These things cannot both be true.
The program failed at its stated goal. That's confirmed. The question, are those methods being used today, presupposes a successful method existed, which the evidence says it didn't.
Now the real gap, and this is the one that doesn't resolve cleanly into either column. We cannot determine from surviving records how many people were subjected to experiments without their knowledge, how many were harmed, or whether any sub-projects continued after 1963 under different code names. Those questions aren't unanswered. They're permanently unanswerable by design.
Permanently unanswerable is doing a lot of work. Walk me through why the 1963 cutoff is itself uncertain.
Because the financial records show activity and the IG report from 1963 flagged concerns. But the program's successor operations, including work on BZ and related compounds, ran into the late 1960s under Army auspices. Whether those were continuous with MKUltra or genuinely separate programs is something the surviving documents can't answer. The code names changed, the institutions overlapped.
So, MKUltra ended in 1963 might mean the brand ended, not the project. That's a very corporate way to continue doing something you said you stopped.
And without the operational files, we can't trace individual subjects across any of those programs. the people who were harmed. Most of them don't have names in any public record. That's not a gap in knowledge. That's a gap in justice.
Here's what makes MKUltra different from most of what we cover on this show. It didn't just become a conspiracy theory. It became the proof that conspiracy theories can be true. When someone says the government has done this before, they mean this specifically. It's the anchor.
It's the one where you can't say trust the institutions, because the institutions literally admitted it, under oath, on the Senate record.
And it spans the political spectrum in a way almost nothing else does. Left, right, libertarian. Everyone lands on MKUltra as evidence for their version of government overreach. It's bipartisan in its damage to public trust.
Which creates a specific problem. The confirmed facts are disturbing enough that they lend credibility to claims that have no factual basis whatsoever. The confirmed horror acts as a kind of collateral credibility for the unconfirmed speculation.
Right. Once you know the government actually did acid experiments on strangers behind one-way mirrors, it becomes very hard to tell someone, no, they didn't do that other thing. The baseline has shifted.
That's the mechanism. Documented betrayal creates the conditions for unlimited suspicion. The Stranger Things version, the celebrity mind control version, the they're still doing it today version. They all run on borrowed credibility from the confirmed record.
And if you want to keep getting actual documented stories, the kind that don't need to borrow credibility from anything, we are here every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss it.
The accountability story is the one I can't stop thinking about. Helms was never charged, not for ordering the destruction of federal records, not for anything MKUltra related. He became ambassador to Iran. He got a Distinguished Intelligence Medal. He died in 2002 at 89 with a memoir that treated the whole thing as a footnote.
Gottlieb retired to his goat farm in Virginia, spent his later years doing volunteer work with the terminally ill, which, depending on your perspective, is either redemption or irony. He died in 1999. No charges, no conviction. The people who could name him as the architect of the program had already forgotten everything under oath.
He spent a decade experimenting on people without their knowledge, and then spent his retirement caring for the dying. I genuinely don't know what to do with that as a human being.
The settlements with Cameron's Canadian victims, 9 people, $100,000 each, represent the only legal accountability anywhere in this entire history. The American subjects who were dosed through Operation Midnight Climax, through the prison experiments, through the dozens of other subprojects, most were never identified. The destruction of the operational files made identifying them impossible. The destruction of the records was the crime that made every other crime permanently uncharged.
That's worth sitting with. It wasn't just evidence destruction. It was accountability destruction. Every person who couldn't be identified couldn't file a claim. Every experiment that wasn't documented couldn't be prosecuted. Helms and Gottlieb didn't just shred files in 1973. They shredded the legal mechanism by which any of it could ever be answered for.
The cover-up didn't just hide what happened. It decided in advance that no one would ever pay for it. That's premeditated impunity. And somehow that's the part of this story that gets the least attention.
Here is the last layer, and it's the one that's hardest to untangle. Stranger Things put MKUltra in living rooms. The 2024 National Security Archive collection put it back on front pages, every new documentary, every Reddit thread, every TikTok about it. They all circulate the confirmed facts alongside the unconfirmed claims in the same breath, at the same volume.
And the problem is you can't fact-check a vibe. Once people know the real story, the fake extensions feel like they're on the same shelf.
That's confirmation bias with an engine. You don't need to manipulate anyone. Just make sure the true horror stays visible, and the unverified claims will draft off it indefinitely.
The CIA actually tried to control human behavior, failed, covered it up, and faced no real consequences. That sentence is so extreme that once you've absorbed it, and they're still doing it to celebrities, barely registers as a logical leap. The confirmed story answers the skeptic's objection before the skeptic can even make it.
It's the original credibility laundering scheme, and they ran it on themselves by actually doing the thing.
Next week, we are at the Dyatlov Pass, February 1959. 9 hikers dead in the Ural Mountains. Tent cut open from the inside. Bodies found scattered in the snow in temperatures that should have driven them back to shelter. The Soviet government locked the investigation report for 30 years. We are going through what the declassified files actually say, and why the official explanation still doesn't fully account for the physical evidence. Don't miss it.
9 people, 1 tent, and a government that looked at the case and said, classified! That tracks.
If you've made it this far into MKUltra, the confirmed version, not the celebrity version, you already know this show doesn't traffic in easy answers. We follow the documents wherever they go.
And if that's the kind of thing you want in your feed every week, actual evidence, actual weirdness, actual unresolved questions, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We will be here.